Good morning, everyone, and we are studying the Torah portion of Chukat. I'm studying from the second talk of the Rebbe from the book Selections from Likutei Sichos. So a short introduction. This week's Torah portion begins with a new law, and the Torah portion is named after this. The law is the red heifer. Very briefly, the Torah introduces this law with the following. God spoke to Moshe and Aaron saying, this is the supra-rational command of the Torah, which God commanded, saying, tell the children of Israel about the red heifer. Super-rational, we're going to call it Chukat. Chukat. Chok in Hebrew is a law that defies all common sense. Says God, in case someone came in contact with a dead corpse, they take a red heifer, a red young cow that's completely red, did not being used for labor at all, and it must be, I believe, at least 2 years old. The Kohen takes her outside of the Holy Temple, burns it, slaughtering it, of course, burns it, mix the ashes with some plants, and together they're adding those plants into the fire when they burn the body parts, and those ashes would serve to sprinkle, mix with holy water, we call them, water that came from the Holy Temple, to serve as a purification for someone who came in contact with dead corpse, someone who's under the same roof, someone who touched it, or someone whose the body hover over the body. The word chukah, super-rational law, is the topic of our discussion. Says the Rebbe. And the verse, this is the statue, chukah, of the Torah. The Medrash comments. The Medrash says the following. There are 4 matters concerning which the evil inclination raises challenges. We all have, most of us do possess evil inclination. The evil inclination is looking for hooks to hook himself in to convince us to disobey God. There are 4 categories, 4 topics, 4 commandments God gave us that the evil inclination keep bothering us without being able to diffuse this is issue. And they are the the childless widow of one's brother, prohibited mixture, kilaim, the goat sent to Azazel on Yom Kippur, and the red heifer, which is our discussion. So there are 4 commandments in the 613 commandments. Not every commandment makes sense, but some commandments, after God commanded them, you can justify it with common sense. There are 4 that common sense do not work. It just does not work. The first one is the wife of a childless brother who died. She must marry the brother. Now, it's forbidden to marry a husband's brother. If that man had children and he died, it is a Torah prohibition to marry his brother, the widow. Yet, if he had no children, she cannot marry anybody but the brother of the husband. Makes no sense. In other words, it's a dichotomy within. The second one is kilaim, the mixture of 2 species. Grafting of 2 plants, grafting of animals is totally forbidden. So it doesn't make sense. The third is, or actually plowing a field with 2 species, a donkey and an ox, a bull, to harness together into a plow machine to plow, that they both do the same work, is totally forbidden. And the third one is, on Yom Kippur, there is a sacrifice to atone the Jewish people, but yet it is taken outside the temple, and it is thrown from a very stiff cliff, a top mountain, very far outside of Jerusalem. This is a sacrifice to God, which makes no sense, because the animal is not getting slaughtered. the animal is just pushed off and is falling apart. By the time it reaches the valley, the bottom of that cliff, there are only pieces of the body. There is no complete body. And the fourth one is this week, the red heifer, to purify someone from dead corpse. Says the Rebbe, from the fact that King Solomon, in Jewish history, he is the wisest of all men that ever existed. He was able to communicate with trees. He knew their language. He was able to communicate and speak with animals. His wisdom is above and beyond all mankind. He says, I try to find reasons for all the Torah, and when it comes to the red heifer, para aduma, amarti erkema, I thought I'll get smart and get it, vehi rechoka mimeni, and it's far away from me. The deeper I delve into understanding it, the farther I realize it is for me. It's one commandment. Not only he could not comprehend, but in addition, the deeper it is diving into understanding, the further it is from him. Says the Rebbe, from here we see that from all four of the categories that are chok, that make no sense, this red heifer is the epitome, is the pinnacle of no common sense. In addition, this is the only time that God calls it, this is the supra-rational law of the Torah, not of the red heifer. When it comes to other times the Torah uses chok, zot chukat pasach, kol ben nechar lo yochal bo. These are the supra-rational commandments of the Passover. Someone who is not circumcised cannot partake. There are many times God used the word chukah, which is super-rational, makes no sense, but it applies to this particular commandment. Here, the only time God calls it Zot Chukat Torah. This is the super-rational law of the entire Torah, meaning that this is, as I said, the pinnacle of all commandments that God gave no reason. Now we understand why King Solomon didn't understand it, because in that way, all the other three, he was able to comprehend. We don't know the reason. They make no sense. But King Solomon did. The fourth one, this one, red heifer, King Solomon discovered that the farther is searching, the farther it is from him. Therefore, says, in addition, the Medrash says that God told Moshe, to you, I will reveal the reason for the red heifer. Is that the Medrash you read?
No. I read somewhere with Shlomo said, the Chokmah is far from me. The Rosh Hashanah, those words are the same as Paraduma.
Okay.
The letters add up to the same sentences.
All right, thank you. Let's continue. Moshe is the only one God revealed the reason. Ask the Rebbe, if God was able to reveal it to Moshe, how come King Solomon didn't understand? Question number two, Moshe was very kind to us. He gave us the Torah. The Torah was a gift to Moshe. That's why I call it Torat Moshe. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. The Torah that is commanded us by Moshe. The 5 books of Moses. God gave it to Moshe. Moshe was kind enough to share with us. How come when it comes to the red heifer, Moshe is preventing us from understanding? It's impossible to say that he wanted to have the ownership of it and to be, huh?
You gave it something to discuss in public class.
Right. Yeah,
Well, by explaining, he did not want to have monopoly, because he should have explained to us, just like he explained everything else in the Torah. Therefore, we must say, says the Rebbe, the reason we don't know the reason Moshe did, not because he didn't want to or God prevented him, it's because it's impossible for us to understand. No matter how far we're going to go, we will not be able to. So there was no way he can explain. Here is the way the Rebbe explains it. The Rebbe says the reason that the Torah calls red heifer Zot Chukat Torah, not Zot Chukat Para, this is the law of Para, God calls it this is the law of Torah, is because it's a general rule that applies to entire Torah. And God wants us to understand that impossible for us to connect to God with our common sense. When I perform mitzvot, the reason I perform mitzvot is because God gave them to us, and we must do them because God gave them. That's a general, not because of our understanding. That's why this law is called Zot Chukat Torah. This is a explanation or a reasoning or an idea that is spilled to the entire Torah. Not only Chukat mitzvot, this is not super-rational of the mitzvah, but of the Torah. The Torah is God's wisdom. God is unlimited. There is no wisdom of God that can be comprehended by human being. When it comes to some of the commandments, God chose to bring them down in common sense. But deeply, this is not the true reason. The true reason is because only God knows. We will never be able to comprehend God's wisdom. So when I perform the mitzvah of tefillin or I eat kosher, I don't know why. God says, for example, keep Passover because I took you out of Egypt on that day, so you remember freedom. That's not the true reason. That's a reason that God gave our common sense to be able to connect to the mitzvah and perform it a little deeper with our intelligence. But the true reason of the commandment is because super rational, makes no sense. The true reason of studying Torah, and we comprehend the Torah, is only an external part of God's wisdom that God chose to share with us. Now we can understand why the Torah left this mitzvah and without any reasoning, so that it became the chukah of the Torah. This spills over to all the other commandments that we do have a reason. If we perform them because we have a reason, because we understand in common sense, that's when I do it, then I become picky. If it doesn't make sense, explain me why, then I'll do it. If it doesn't make sense, I won't do it. And therefore, the Talmud tells us there is a possibility for a great scholar to be Naval Birshut HaTorah. Naval Birshut HaTorah means someone can become a very defiled person in his conduct and say the Torah gives me permission. I can find the reason in the Torah. There was a student in the Talmudic time that was able to find 150 reasons to purify the impure. He can, whatever the Torah says it's impure and we have no contact with, he would find Kuf Nun, 150 reasons why it should be kosher. And the Torah said still, it's not kosher, because it's beyond common sense. As soon as you use common sense, we need to understand that our intelligence, no matter how high the IQ, is very finite. And there is no comparison, there is no connection. It's not the tool in which we connect to God. Connecting to God must be done with common sense as an aid, as a bonding mechanism that makes us enjoy and understand why we do. But that's not the true reason. The true reason is because God said so. And therefore, I obey God just like a robot, follow the command, the central command or the remote control. We follow God's commandments. The same is the study of Torah. We must understand. If we don't understand what you study, in most cases, you did not fulfill the mitzvah of studying Torah. But the reason we have common sense and understand the verses of the Torah and the Mishnah and Talmud and Code of Law is not the true deep reason. The true deep reason is God's wisdom. God's wisdom is beyond comprehension. It shows that God chose to dress it up in a kind way that we can connect. So far, so good. Says the Rebbe, now, that's why we have an idea of understanding the Torah. The Talmud teaches us, Yagata umatzata. If you delve and toil hard in the Torah, you will find and discover the Torah far, far greater than the effort you put in. And that's very unique. Just like everything else, there is a relationship, there is a correlation between my investment and the return. For example, if I invest in learning math, I discover the principles. Now I have the principles, I can understand multiplication or tabulation. I'm able to understand the topic based on my knowledge. Now, if I go to a higher grade and another level of math or algebra, I am able to get deeper and greater into that field. When it comes to the Torah, if I put myself into studying God's Torah, yagata denu matzata. Matzata, it's like finding a lost object that someone else lost, has nothing to do with my investment. In other words, the discovery of Torah is incomprehensible to the level of my investment. Because if you follow the investment, the effort of the investment, the reward, the discovery of Torah, it would be far, far less. The reason we have great sages and we have people who have discovered deeper teaching of Torah is not because they were able to say, to put one and one together as equal to. It's because God says the Torah is super rational, and therefore the reasoning and common sense is a gift from God. And in Him, if you put all the efforts and you lose yourself and connect totally to God, God in reward will reciprocate it in a far, far greater discovery than the effort comes. And that explains a lot of things. So, for example, to comprehend young men who have impacted the Torah life in ways that until they 2,000 years later, Rabbi Akiva, at the age of 40, he couldn't even read Hebrew. He hated scholars, but he goes and he loses himself into the depth of study of Torah, and he becomes the greatest teacher, gave all the tradition. Rabbi Saadia Gaon, a man that was chased by enemies, he gave us a commentary to the Torah, counted all. The Rashba in the 16th, Rabbi Shmuel ben Aderet, a major sage at the age of the 1600, that was a doctor, a community leader, and a dean of a yeshiva. And the Rebbe says that he also had a time, because he was a doctor, he had a time every day to take a walk for an hour walk, despite the fact that he had to deal with a large Jewish community with all the needs of the orphans and the widows, and all the community affair with the government. At the same time, he was a doctor seeing patients. He also had a yeshiva. He would give a daily Torah lesson for students, and you can imagine the great students. Many of his students wrote many books. Yet he would take a day, every day, an hour to walk. The way to explain, it's impossible to explain other than just God's blessing that entered himself just because he gave himself totally to the study of Torah. Therefore, common sense is something that's holding us back from connecting to God. Because if I base my service of God based on common sense, I'm shrinking it to my human mind. But the Torah and the mitzvot are tools that enable us to connect directly to God without the confinement of the human mind. Did you understand so far? Says the Rebbe. Now we can understand why the Medrash says that when Moshe, very briefly, two more points. The Medrash says that when Moshe heard that God gave the commandment of the red heifer to purify someone in contact of the dead corpse, nitkarkemu panav, he got sick in his head, his face got closed down. He says, I do not understand. How is it possible to purify someone? It's impossible. It makes no sense. So, Rebbe, I don't understand. This defilement, this impurity is not the worst. A metzorah, someone who is afflicted with a skin disease, is a far deeper impurity, because someone who is contacted a dead corpse is allowed to be within the community, is allowed to enter the Levite community, is not allowed to enter the temple. But someone who is a metzorah, defiled of this skin disease, had to leave Levite section, Israelite section as well, and be by himself. In other words, his defilement is far deeper. Moshe had no problem with that. Only when it comes to dead corpse. Says the Rebbe, the reason is because as long as you have a neshama, you are connected to God. So there is a connection. There is an established connection. Now, temporarily, the connection is cut off. You have to be cut out of the Jewish people, but you will be able to return back. So it makes sense to him. But someone who came in contact with a dead corpse, what is a dead corpse? That the soul is a part of the body. This is a whole different category now. It's not the same. It's not a human being anymore. A human being is with a godly soul. Moshe said, it's impossible to return back to life. What does God do? God says to him, this is the supra-rational of the Torah. It actually makes no sense. And it's very difficult, not very difficult, it's impossible for human mind to comprehend. How is it to bring back someone that connected a dead corpse and back to the community? Because handling a dead corpse is only no life there, so it's not a human. And yet he can return back to godliness. It's because God said so, and it makes no reason. That's why this super rational that God shows as the pinnacle of the entire Torah, study of Torah, and the observance of all the commandments is embodied and is exemplified by the law of Chukat Torah of the red heifer. Because in that way, coming in contact with a dead corpse is going as farther as you can from godliness, and it's impossible to compare anything to it. And yet God says it can be returned. He can return back to godliness. You know why? Because this is a super rational, it makes no sense. Now you understand that every other commandment, even though I gave you the reason, and every part of study of Torah, even though you must comprehend and understand, that's not what connects us to God. The connection to God is the actual obeying God, the obedience. The following God's commandments is what connects us. Now we can address one more question, only directly to the topic. Yeah, just a minute, Harry?
Same question, if you touch a dead body, and you come tell me, why can't you just wash your hands and see it, you only touched it?
Right. Says the Rebbe, this is not a... Okay, so I skipped the Rebbe's example, and I'm going to clarify. Says Rebbe, anytime you become defiled, impure, like in a skin disease, imagine you have a diamond that has mud covering it. Now the diamond doesn't look like a diamond. It looks like a dirty stone. All you have to do is wash it. What happens when you wash it? You didn't change the diamond. You just removed all the barriers and allowed the diamond to shine. When someone came in contact with a dead corpse, it did not defile in the term of adding mud into the diamond. What it did is he's scraping off the diamond and removing it from the ring. Because the diamond is shining, the idea of a diamond is godly soul. Without a godly soul, we have nothing. Therefore, says Rabbi, how can you return back to the community? There is no diamond. How can you be shining again like a diamond anymore? This is a new student that's coming. He's crying because he wants to understand every part of the Torah. So back to our discussion. It's not about cleaning, it's about returning back the diamond. Every other defilement, the diamond has added to it some dirt that can be removed. And the diamond was not affected. The neshama is always there. Dead corpse means that the neshama is not there. If you came in contact, there is nothing that will ever bring it back. And God says to him, actually, it makes no sense. That's why Shlomo, King Solomon, was able to discover all the other super rationals, the other four. But this one, he says, is closer, as deeper as I delve into it, the farther it is for me, because it doesn't work. Now what left to us to understand is how come Moshe did. Says the Rebbe, the reason that God gave us a commandment without explaining it, even though he could have explained it to us, is because God wants to teach us that our service of God be done with total bitul, self-nullification. Even when we have the reasoning is a very external aspect that God chose to give us the reasoning, so it's easier for us to comprehend, to connect, to obey. But that's not the true reason. Now, if Moshe Rabbeinu has a common sense and understand every part of the Torah, similarly is lacking the idea of bitul, of connecting to God on that level and applying it to the rest of the commandments. Therefore, the Rebbe explains, yes.
You also say it's bitachon and emunah.
Bitachon and emunah, that's part of bitul, exactly. It's another word for the same concept. Thank you. Says the Rebbe by Moshe, what is the characteristic that define Moshe as opposed to all other Jewish leaders or humanity? Is humility. The Torah says, "Vayish Moshe anav me'od mikol adam asher al pnei adama." He's the most humble man from all men on the face of the earth, at his time and in the future. What defines Moshe is humility, which is bitul, Total nullification to God, complete nullification to God. Therefore, says the Rebbe, God was able to impart on Moshe the reason, the way it is with God, which all other human beings are not able to, because we have a human mind, and the human mind is a barrier between us and God. The Torah wants to teach us red heifer to remove that barrier and connect to Him on His level, not on my level. Anytime I use common sense, what I do is I connect with on my level. God wants us to connect on His level, not on my level. Moshe was connecting to God on his level within being a human being with his mindset. That's why he had total bitul. Says the Rebbe, that's the reason not only God chose Moshe to teach it to, but Moshe couldn't teach it to us. Because Moshe's understanding is so past common sense. It's not about common sense, because if it was common sense, Moshe wouldn't be able to connect to it. It is the level of bitul of Moshe to the essence of God. It's called pnimiyut atik. The essence of God before it is come dressed in common sense or other type of 10 sfirot, the 10 attributes. And therefore Moshe reached much closer to God than the prophet. So therefore Moshe's understanding of the Parah Aduma, of the red heifer, is not something he can explain to you, because it's something that's beyond common sense. It's another type of connection to God that he was able to connect to that we are unable to, because we are never able to connect to God on that level, except when Mashiach will come. When Mashiach will come, it says there will be no more questions. If anybody paid attention, is familiar with this? All the teikur, all the questions in the Talmud that are unsolved, Eliyahu will solve them. It says, Zohar says that in the world to come, in Mashiach's time, there will be no questions, no doubts. Everything will be resolved. Everything will be settled down. In other words, common sense, right now, we need to understand, although it is the most valuable tool God gave us, because with common sense, we are able to advance, to connect, to improve, to purify. Common sense is the greatest tool God gave us, perhaps the greatest of all. Yet common sense from God's perspective is a created being, and therefore it's a finite, limiting tool that does not allow a barrier between us and God. Mashiach will come, God will remove that common sense barrier, and we'll be able to connect to God on a deeper level. It's called pnimiyut atik, and that's the level that Moshe lived by. And therefore, there is no common sense. Now we can understand why Moshe did understand, yet King Solomon did not. And we can understand why Moshe did understand, but yet he could not share it with us. Not because he wanted to have uniqueness or monopoly over that. He didn't want to have control over that. It's impossible for him to explain. Now we can understand why this is the super rational law of the Torah. Zot Chukat Torah, not of the red heifer, because this is the pinnacle. This is the sample that God wants us to learn how to connect to God with every other mitzvot. Why the red heifer is chosen, even though there are many other commandments, is because red heifer is the farthest you can comprehend, because it's dealing with someone who is defiled to a dead corpse, where the neshama is not there, is dead. And therefore, no matter which way, which dimension you look at it, it doesn't make sense. Completely no sense. Yet, God allows us to return back and to purify. Why? Because that's God's super rational commandment. And that's the way we study Torah. That's the way we perform the mitzvot. And if we do so, we are able to hasten the arrival of Mashiach when it will become day-to-day life. Thank you, and have a good Shabbos, everybody.